introduction. Thank you, Encorepreneur, for asking me to speak on a very non-controversial topic. What a great venue. This is my first time at the center, and it's when we see all the great things that are happening in our VA, this is clearly going to be a great talking point and selling point of our region. So, I want to first talk to you about what I'm not going to talk about. I'm not going to talk to you today, although Tom's poem reminds us about our initial founding, that we're a country that's very different in that we were founded by immigrants. By immigrants who were seeking, were fleeing religious persecution or seeking economic prosperity. I'm not going to talk about the fact that many of the people who are the anti-immigration architects have benefited from U.S. immigration. And believe it or not, I'm not going to talk about any party-leaning focus, because I think that both the Democrats and the Republicans have equally contributed to the effectiveness of our current immigration policy. So, what are we going to discuss today? We're talking about immigration, and who knew it would be so complicated? Well, immigration attorneys know it's very complicated, and the people going through the process know it's very complicated. But what we wanted to do today is discuss immigration in a different perspective. Most of you are either business owners or working in a business, and we thought, let's take the business perspective when it comes to immigration. Let us all put on the hats of perhaps being shareholders of the United States. And by agreeing on one thing, which I think everyone can agree on, that one of our strategic objectives is economic growth for the United States. So, with that in mind, we're going to touch on a few topics. Unless Stan is planning to give us overnight accommodation, there's no way we can get into the details. So we want to highlight some, broad topics. And if any of you are interested in where our sources are coming from, we've picked nonpartisan sources, we've picked government sources for a lot of the information we're talking about. So you can email us at info@challalaw.com, and we're happy to send the references to you. Because it's important to know where your news is coming from and your information is coming from, right? Okay. So, detention. We can all agree that our borders need to be secure. We can all agree that our immigration policies have to align with our national security. But let's, again, wear that hat as a business person. And for example, if you are entrusted in trying to identify what type of security is needed for your office, you could do that with ADT at $90 a month. You could do that having a high-tech surveillance system at maybe $2,000 a month. Or you can have an armed guard at the door of your business and have people pass through a metal detector at maybe some whopping $20,000 a month. Your first exercise in that is that you would try to assess how much you're going to invest in security based on the risk, right? Because if you just decide to choose the most secure method with an armed guard at the door and having everyone pass through a metal detector, well, after a while, maybe your clients won't want to come visit you at your office because they don't want to go through that burdensome process. And if you're spending $20,000 to $30,000 a month on security, that roof that needs fixing, you won't be able to have any capital to fix that roof or invest in technology that may fuel your economic growth of your business. So those are the types of assessments that we have to make. So when we think about what's happening in the realm of detention, keep these numbers in mind that I've got up. So first, is illegal entry a national crisis? Are we having floods and floods of people coming into our borders? Well, the Mexican nationals actually make up the largest portion of our undocumented community. And it has been shown in recent times that not only is there a decline of Mexican nationals crossing over into the U.S. illegally, there is actually a number of Mexican nationals that are going back to their home country. And that's attributed in large to the fact that wages for Mexican nationals are on the rise back in their home country. Now, the other group of individuals that are crossing into our borders are what's referred to as the Northern Triangle: El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. And there is a vast number of reasons why they may be fleeing their home country to try to come into the United States. But in terms of numbers, as you can see, the largest influx of people came in 2007. And the Pew Research Center has calculated that the change in the shift in the Mexican population who are returning back to their home country kind of cancels out the individuals coming in from Central America. So then as you're analyzing your risk, you may think, okay, so we don't have a lot of people coming in, but maybe the types of people that are coming in pose a risk to our safety, right? So let's first understand what the criminality is of crossing into the borders without documentation. It's a misdemeanor. It's a criminal misdemeanor, akin to driving 20 miles over the speed limit. And that misdemeanor has a 5-year statute of limitations, at which point it becomes a civil offense. So those people who are detained, years after they've entered the United States have committed a civil offense. Now, there are exceptions if the person has been deported and they're returning after a deportation order, or if they're actually like the coyotes who are trying to illegally bring groups of people into the United States. So if the offense of crossing into the United States is not a serious offense, then perhaps the people who are entering have committed other crimes. Because we keep hearing the word criminal aliens in the news. So Syracuse University has a clinic or group that studies or tracks the migration of the undocumented immigrants into the United States. And they also track, how long they have applied. And this is the 2017 numbers, that the top charge for people who are being detained is illegal entry. The second being reentry, and the third being harboring. Only 0.11% of the people being detained today can be perceived as violent. So, what does that mean in terms of cost? Privately run prisons cost about $60,000. 60% of all people are in privately run prisons, and it's costing us $150 per day per person. Municipal run prisons are about $100 a month. And so now we need to assess, does that risk really benefit the cost it is costing us? And if you've got families, detention is a little more expensive at $319 per day. And because we are providing summer camps to these children who are being detained, it's $775 per day. And early 2008, the administration, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, the Department of Homeland Security, announced they're going to increase the net of the people they're going to detain. So first we started out with a zero tolerance policy, then the separation of families. Pregnant women who were typically not detained, but they were given monitored ankle bracelets, are now being detained mandatorily. And they have the choice. Even in instances where they say, the health of the mother is, she may not get the care that she needs. The choice is either go home or be detained. There is a growing number of Vietnamese nationals who are detained, and if you remember, we signed in 2008 a repatriation agreement with the country of Vietnam, where individuals that have arrived from Vietnam pre-1995 would not be repatriated back. And if any of those individuals, for example, years ago, committed any crime, they have already served their time, and they've already served time in detention as a result of whatever crime, but they were never deported back because of the agreement. So now these individuals are just being detained, and the Vietnamese government is not accepting their return. Permanent residents who are here perhaps as an overstay, because if you've entered illegally, you can't gain permanent residence, but you've entered with the visa and you've overstayed, you may be able to get permanent residence if you marry a U.S. citizen. So in Boston, the USCIS and ICE kind of got the list of all the marriage-based and petitions and the interviews that were coming up. So when the individuals went to their marriage-based interview, now historically that period, once you file an immigrant petition, is almost as if you've been given a provisional waiver. You're in a stay authorized by the Attorney General, you're not deported, because you are eligible for that immigration benefit of becoming a permanent resident. So in Boston, what they did was after the interview, ICE officials were at the door ready to detain the individuals as soon as they left the interview. Students and non-immigrants, a new rule is coming up. So if you're in the United States, not everyone is a permanent resident. Those who are here legally in a temporary status are called non-immigrants. There are our students, there are H-1Bs, Es, there's a number of different classifications, but these are doctors, these are business people who are investing in the United States. They file different petitions for extensions and amendments in the U.S. And typically you file it with the USCIS, and if the USCIS has any questions, and guess what? Sometimes they are mistaken. They make mistakes. You're typically given a chance to respond to their questions through request for evidence. So, effective, I think it's September 14th, the USCIS will have discretion to summarily deny petitions and not issue requests for evidence, placing these individuals in deportation proceedings. Just think about that. If you are a business person looking to invest $10 million in the U.S. and, you can be placed in deportation proceedings. So whenever I see a major change in policy, I always think you got to follow the money. And in this instance, the GEO group and Core Civic group, they are two private prisons, and they're doing incredibly well. And George Zuley, the CEO of the GEO group, said earlier this year that he assured his investors that the demand will increase, and he thinks that there will be opportunities to fill the 7,000 available beds that they had. And boy, was he right. So private prisons, profits are up 4%. GEO Group themselves spent $1.7 million on lobbying efforts, and there were a number of hearings that took place, because even under President Obama's realm, he was the, deporter-in-chief is what the term was, and they held a bunch of hearings about the private prisons. The kicker is most of these contracts with private prisons have a mandatory bed requirement. So there is, you're embodying that group to try to incentivize increasing detention efforts. So who's paying for this? And the $139, $40 per month is a combination of both what the average would be with privately run and municipal prisons. But it's a whopping $372 million per year, and you and I are paying for it. It's taxpayer funds. And with that money, if you think about in 1 year, $372 million, what could we be spending that money on? Well, infrastructure. There are 55,000 bridges that need repair. The cost to fix the Washington Memorial Bridge is $227 million. And 68,000 people cross that bridge every day. And can you just imagine the jobs that would be created? It's the Metropolitan Research Center at the University of Utah said that actually jobs for repairing rather than new construction create more U.S. jobs. So that's what we could do with the money. Now, another term that we keep hearing about in the news is chain immigration. I mean, when you think about it, you think if foreign national gets into this country and then they just pull their entire community from their home country into the U.S. Well, you can't pull everybody. Now, if you look, not only you can't sponsor every one of your family members, but your ability to sponsor depends on your current status. So U.S. citizens, yes, they can sponsor their married and unmarried children, their spouse, their parents, and their siblings, but they can't sponsor their cousins or uncles. Permanent residents can only sponsor their spouses and unmarried children. If the children get married, they no longer can sponsor them. They can't sponsor their parents. And later on, I'll talk about what the pathway is from permanent residence to citizenship. There's a time period and other requirements that are in place. Well, the other discussion is these family members that, pursuant to chain immigration, they're a burden on our public benefits. Well, every family-based petition, you have to file an affidavit of support. The person who is sponsoring, either the U.S. citizen or the permanent resident, must file an affidavit of support to affirm that they're financially responsible for the family members for a period of 10 years. And so, and in addition to that, under President Clinton, IRA, they're permanent residents, there's certain benefits that they're not eligible for. Now, there are some that are grandfathered in pre-IRA, but for the most part, new permanent residents are not eligible. And the chain moves a little slow. It's not pulling people too fast. If you were a spouse, you're sponsoring your foreign national spouse overseas as a U.S. citizen, it's 1 year. Your married sons and daughters, 12 years. Your siblings, 14 years. If you're a permanent resident, you cannot bring your spouse into the country for up to 2 years. And your unmarried sons and daughters, 7 years. So, as I stated, the chain moves very slow. So, we've talked about family immigration, detention. Now let's focus on students and business. So students are not only drive innovation, but they're also economic drivers as well. So for every 7 international students, 3 U.S. jobs are created. It's $36.9 billion to our economies, and as I will talk about later, other countries are vying for the bid. It's amazing that on a global standing, students really work hard to try to get admissions to U.S. universities. They have to go through quite a bit, and we're still the destination, or at least we have been so far, for these international resources. Virginia, we've got 20,000 international students, and right here at VCU, those students have contributed $60 million in revenue and over 1,000 jobs. So the impact on higher education, there has been a decrease in the number of international admissions to the United States. And if you look at the decrease in terms of how Virginia was affected, you're talking about $14 million in revenue that we lost as a result. But in addition, these international resources provide, like I said, they are the innovators, so we're also losing out on that great talent. And the same study had outlined that our workforce in Virginia, 73% of the working population between 24 and 64 are foreign nationals. So with the baby boomer situation, people retiring, workforce is going to become a greater issue. In terms of skills, in 2017, the Global Information Security Workforce Study predicts in the United States there'll be 1.8 million security-related, like cybersecurity-related jobs unfilled. So, as I said, immigrants are drivers of innovation. And half the companies with the immigrant founder had come to the U.S. as a foreign student. And if you read Brookings' report that came out maybe about 4 or 5 months ago about innovation hubs, to make sure that your locality is right for entrepreneurship and growth, they state that it's got to be a public-private partnership, but a strong academic setting. So, and the reason why, oh gosh, okay, the academic setting is so critical is, and how the foreign students impact that, you'll see when I give you the STEM numbers about admissions. So, immigrant entrepreneurs, 40% of all the Fortune 500 companies had at least one immigrant founder. They've generated $65 billion in business income in 2014. There is a STEM shortage, and as a result, you can see here, you see Virginia, that for every one STEM worker who's unemployed, there's 20 to 44 jobs that are available. The STEM profile, and this is what I was saying is critical for that innovation hub. The vast majority in our STEM, higher studies are international students. Okay, so there's 6,000 immigrant entrepreneurs in Richmond, and as they say, immigrants, what's interesting is they contribute to the economic pie while competing for a slice, which is critical. And foreign direct investment we used to be the big driver of that. In 2000, we were getting 39%. In 2014, we only got 21%. Like I said, there are other countries that are vying for that piece. 36 represents the 36% chance that a foreign national is able to secure an H-1B and a pathway to work. It takes 10 years for a master's degree holder from MIT, who is an Indian or Chinese national, who's working for IBM to get a green card. And if their children turn 21 while they're in that waiting process, they have to start over as foreign students and F1 and go through that process again. After becoming a permanent resident, it takes 5 years to become a U.S. citizen. The USCIS, the Department of Homeland Security, their credo is now Buy America, Hire America. And I think we can do that if we use common sense and approach to immigration and not. China and Australia have, as part of their national strategic plan, to increase international students to choose China and Australia because they understand what great economic drivers there are. And the way they're doing that is creating a pathway for work authorization after the individuals graduate. And I'm just going to end with giving you a quote from what the President of China said at the World Economic Forum. He said, whether you like it or not, the global economy is a big ocean that you cannot escape from. Any attempt to cut off the flow of capital, technologies, products, industries, and people between economies and channel the waters in the ocean back to isolated lakes and creeks is simply not possible. Indeed, it runs counter to the historical trend. We need to be a meaningful player in the global economy. We need to make sure that our immigration policies align with our business and strategic objectives for growth. And we need to make sure that as a community, we're able to have this dialogue, kind of putting our partisan hats aside. Thank you.